When I was 20, I spoke English like a walking translation machine. Every sentence started in my head, in my native language, and then got pushed through a broken filter before it came out of my mouth. The result? Confused faces, awkward silences, people nodding politely and then walking away. My accent was heavy, my vocabulary was tiny, and every conversation felt like a test I was failing. But what hurt the most wasn't the grammar mistakes or the blank stares. It was the feeling that I had something to say, but no way to say it. Maybe you felt that too. Maybe you're learning English right now, and even though you understand what people say, speaking still feels like climbing a mountain with no map. If that's you, welcome. You're not alone. And more importantly, you're not stuck. In today's video on Jackson English Stories, I want to take you on a journey. Not just my journey, but a path you can walk too. You'll discover the 3 steps that took me from nervous whispers to native-like fluency. You'll learn why traditional methods fail and what to do instead. And most importantly, you'll see how small, daily actions can transform the way you speak, think, and even feel in English. But before we dive in, let me ask you this. What would change in your life if you could speak English fluently? Hold on to that thought, because the answer might be closer than you think. Let's begin. Let me tell you something that most textbooks won't. If you've been studying English for years and still struggle to speak it fluently, it's not because you're lazy. It's not because you're bad at languages. And it's definitely not because you're not trying hard enough. The truth is, most English learners are following a system that was never designed to make them speak fluently. A system that focuses on memorizing vocabulary, filling out worksheets, and passing grammar tests, but not on actually using the language in real life. I remember one student, Luis from Mexico. He had studied English for over 10 years in school. He could read newspapers, write decent essays, even understand movies with subtitles. But when it came to speaking, he froze every time. It's like I know the words, he told me, but my mouth forgets how to say them. Sound familiar? That's not a memory problem. That's a training problem. Luis had never trained his mouth, his breath, his rhythm to move like English. He learned about the language, but he never practiced becoming the language. Here's the lesson. If your English isn't improving the way you hoped, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you haven't been shown a method that works with your brain and your body, not just your notebook. And that's what we're going to fix, starting now. Because in the next part, I'll show you how a single shift in mindset and one surprising strategy open the door to everything. Let's keep going. Let's be honest, learning English is hard enough. But learning it while feeling embarrassed every time you open your mouth, that's something else entirely. And it's exactly what happens when your words come out broken, or when your accent is so strong that people ask you to repeat yourself again and again. I remember a moment that still stings. I was at a coffee shop in New York, just trying to order a sandwich. I said what I thought was clear English, but the cashier leaned in, eyebrows furrowed, and asked, "Sorry, what was that?" The guy behind me sighed loudly. I felt my ears turn hot. I repeated myself, slower this time. She finally understood, but I didn't. I walked out that day with a sandwich in my hand and shame in my chest. That's what broken sentences do. That's what a thick, untrained accent does. They don't just slow down your communication. They chip away at your confidence, one small misunderstanding at a time. And here's the thing. It's not about having an accent. Everyone has one. It's about clarity. If your sentences are choppy, your rhythm unnatural, your voice uncertain, people struggle to understand you, and you start to doubt yourself. But here's the lesson. Fluency isn't about sounding perfect. It's about sounding sure, even when you're still learning. And that means training your mouth, not just your mind. Because when your mouth feels the words, your confidence begins to return. And that confidence? It's exactly what I began to rebuild the day I discovered one simple, overlooked strategy. The strategy that finally helped me speak, not just study, English. Let me share that with you. Next. When I first moved to the US, I was young, broke, and couldn't speak English fluently. That's a tough combination. And like many immigrants, I was offered what most people call survival jobs. My uncle worked at a Chinese restaurant in Queens, and he found me a spot, kitchen assistant. No English required. Just chop vegetables, wash dishes, and keep your head down. And I was grateful, but also heartbroken, because deep down, I knew something. If I accepted that job, not just once, but as my path, I might stay there forever. Not because I wasn't smart enough, but because my English wasn't strong enough to ask for anything more. I could picture it. 10 years from now, still wearing the same apron, still being told what to do, still hiding the voice I knew I had. That vision scared me more than anything else. So I made a decision, not out of pride, but out of desperation. I didn't want to survive. I wanted to grow. I wanted to speak up in meetings, not just smile and nod. I wanted to have choices, not just take what I was given. And that's when everything changed. I stopped waiting for English to magically get better. I started owning it, practicing every day, speaking even when it felt awkward, pushing through the silence. Here's the small lesson I learned. Sometimes the fear of what you don't want is the fire that fuels what you can become. And speaking of becoming, in the next part, I'll show you the biggest mistake I made at the beginning of that journey, and how you can avoid it from day one. Sometimes, it only takes one moment, one uncomfortable truth, to wake you up. For me, that moment came in a crowded kitchen behind a busy restaurant, where the air smelled like soy sauce and sweat. I was 20 years old, barely speaking English, and washing dishes with a cracked glove and tired hands. The job wasn't horrible. The people weren't mean. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the life I wanted. Not because I thought I was better than the work, but because I felt like my voice was buried under all that noise and steam. I kept thinking, is this it? Is this what my life will look like if I never learn to speak up? You see, that's what limited English does. It doesn't just limit your vocabulary, it limits your opportunities. When you can't express your thoughts clearly, people assume you don't have any. When you speak with hesitation, they don't just hear your accent, they hear uncertainty. And that's when I realized, if I didn't change my English, my future would already be decided for me. So I made a promise to myself. I may not have money for private lessons, I may not have a tutor, but I do have time. I have effort, I have a reason, and that was enough to start. The lesson? Sometimes, the future you don't want is the clearest guide toward the life you're meant to build. And that decision led me to search, to study, to question everything I'd been taught, including a surprising discovery I never expected. When I first got serious about improving my English, I did what seemed logical. I followed the advice of native speakers. I read their books, watched their tutorials, and tried to copy the way they spoke. But after months of doing everything by the book, something felt off. My vocabulary grew a little. My listening improved. But my speaking, still slow, still broken, still filled with hesitation. That's when I realized something that changed everything. Just because someone can do something naturally doesn't mean they can teach it effectively, especially to someone starting from zero. Let me give you an example. A friend of mine, Mark, was born and raised in Chicago. One day I asked him how to sound more fluent. He paused and said, "I don't know. Just talk like normal." He wasn't being rude. He genuinely didn't understand the struggle. For him, English was water. For me, it was like learning how to breathe underwater. That's when I made a shift. I started learning from non-native speakers, people who had become fluent, not those who were born that way. And guess what? Their advice was different. Clearer, more practical, more encouraging. They knew the fear of saying the wrong thing. They knew what it felt like to freeze mid-sentence, and they knew exactly how to get through it, because they had lived it. The lesson is simple. Native speakers can inspire you, but people who've walked the same road as you, they can guide you. And one day, while reading one of those books by a fluent non-native speaker, I found a sentence so simple, yet so powerful, that it changed the way I practiced English forever. It was just one line in a small book written by a non-native English speaker. No bold font, no special headline, just a simple sentence buried in the middle of a chapter. Repeat what you hear, again and again. At first it felt obvious, too obvious. But the more I thought about it, the more it clicked. I had read over 60 books on learning English, all written by native speakers, and not one of them had emphasized repetition like this. They talked about listening, reading, even grammar games, but not repeating, not out loud, not daily, not obsessively. And yet, it made perfect sense. How do kids learn to speak? They hear something dozens of times, they mimic it, they mess it up, and they try again, not once, not twice, over and over until it becomes part of them. So I tried it. I took a short news clip, played it on my old Walkman, and started repeating each sentence I heard. I didn't wait to understand every word. I didn't stop to translate. I just copied the sounds like a musician learning a song by ear. At first it felt awkward. My tongue didn't move the way it should. I stumbled. I mumbled. But after a few days, something shifted. The rhythm of English started to feel natural. Phrases that once felt foreign began to roll off my tongue like second nature. That's when I understood. Repetition doesn't just build memory. It builds muscle. And fluent speech, that's not just knowledge. It's coordination. It's flow. If you've ever struggled to speak, even when you know the words, this might be the missing piece. And speaking of missing pieces, there's one more thing I wish I had known earlier. Why the strategies in most English books fail when it comes to real speaking. After reading book number 40-something on how to speak English fluently, I closed the cover and let out a sigh. Not because it was bad, but because it sounded exactly like the last 5 I'd read. Watch English movies. Learn 5 new words a day. Think in English, all helpful advice, in theory. But the problem was, none of these books ever showed you how to actually do those things in real life, when you're tired, overwhelmed, or too nervous to speak. And more importantly, they didn't come from people who'd been in my shoes, people who had struggled to learn English from scratch, with fear, with limited time, with zero confidence. One book even suggested I should talk to native speakers at coffee shops. Nice idea. But what if you live in a neighborhood where no one speaks English? What if just thinking about starting a conversation makes your heart race? That's what most fluency books miss. They focus on the language, not the learner. They give strategies but not systems. And they assume fluency is a destination, when really, it's a practice. I finally stopped looking for perfect tips and started looking for repeatable habits. That's when things began to shift. Here's the small lesson I learned. You don't need more tips. You need a rhythm. Something you can do every day, even when motivation is low and life gets messy. And I discovered that rhythm not by reading more books, but by changing who I learned from and how I applied what they said. For the longest time, I thought I was doing everything right. I listened to English CDs. I watched videos of actors speaking in polished, slow, textbook-perfect conversations. I repeated phrases like, "How do you do?" and "It's my pleasure to meet you." But then I tried using those phrases in real life, and people looked at me, confused. Not because my grammar was wrong, but because I sounded like a robot stuck in the 1950s. That's when it hit me. I was learning English from the wrong models. Not wrong as in bad people, but wrong as in unrealistic, scripted, stiff. These weren't the conversations people were having on the streets, in cafes, or at work. They were performance pieces, language theater. And here's the dangerous part. When you follow those models too closely, you start believing that's how you're supposed to sound. So when your real-life conversations don't match what you practiced, you blame yourself. You think, maybe I'm not good enough. But the truth is, you were imitating a mask, not a person. A friend of mine, Sarah, once told me, "I studied English for years, but I only started feeling fluent when I began copying real people, not actors." That stuck with me. Here's the lesson. If you want to speak English like it's part of your soul, not just your studies, you have to learn from people who speak naturally, not perfectly. And once I figured that out, I started choosing my practice materials more carefully. I stopped copying phrases that no one actually uses, and started listening to conversations that felt alive. But even then, I was still missing one small, powerful detail. Not what to listen to, but how to use it. Every morning, I left my small apartment in Brooklyn and walked 12 minutes to the subway. Then I stood shoulder to shoulder with strangers as the train rattled its way to Manhattan. 40 minutes each way, nearly 2 hours total, 5 days a week. For most people, it was just a commute. For me, it became a classroom. Armed with nothing but a cheap Walkman and a cassette I recorded the night before, I turned the subway into my English training ground. No quiet desk, no fancy apps, just headphones, noise, and focus. I started by listening to the news, National Public Radio, slow and steady. At first I barely understood anything, but I listened anyway. Then I repeated what I heard, quietly at first. Just a whisper, then eventually the roar of the train became my cover. No one noticed, no one cared, and I got braver. I would rewind the tape again and again until I could say what I heard. Not just understand it, say it. Sometimes I spent 10 minutes on one sentence, but I didn't give up. Why? Because that train ride was the only time I had to practice, and I knew every second counted. Here's the lesson. You don't need perfect conditions to grow. You just need consistency and a bit of creativity. The subway became my fluency lab, and little by little, my brain started changing. My mouth followed. I was training, not just studying, and the more I trained, the more confident I became. But confidence doesn't grow without courage, and sometimes courage shows up when you least expect it. Like when you go from whispering in your seat to speaking out loud for the first time. In the beginning, Noise felt like the enemy. I used to think, how can I focus on speaking English when the train sounds like a thunderstorm? But over time, I realized that noise, chaotic, unpredictable, loud noise, was actually a gift. See, when you're nervous about speaking a new language, silence can feel intimidating. Every little mistake echoes. Every pause feels heavy. But in the subway, no one could hear me. Not clearly anyway. The clattering wheels, the screeching brakes, the hum of the crowd, they covered my voice like a blanket. And that freedom changed everything. I stopped worrying about being perfect. I stopped judging myself for sounding strange. Instead, I spoke louder. I repeated faster. I practiced bolder. I wasn't performing, I was training. There's one day I'll never forget. The train had just pulled out of the station. I was practicing a new sentence over and over. The economic recovery remains uncertain. I stumbled the first 5 times. But the 6th time, it rolled off my tongue, smooth, strong, confident. And for the first time, I felt like English was living inside me, not just something I was trying to reach. Here's the lesson. Sometimes the very thing you think is holding you back is exactly what sets you free. So if your life is noisy, good. Use it. Let the world around you be your training ground. And once I embraced that mindset, I realized something even bigger. I didn't need a classroom. I already had everything I needed to succeed. And that mindset, combined with one simple device, took my fluency to the next level. There was something magical about that old Walkman. It wasn't fancy, it didn't have Bluetooth or a touch screen, but it gave me something far more powerful: control. Every night, I'd record the news onto a cassette, and every morning, that tape became my teacher. At first, I whispered what I heard, quiet, shaky echoes of native speakers. My voice felt foreign, like I was borrowing someone else's language. But little by little, something shifted. The more I repeated, the more I began to feel the words. Not just mimic them, but own them. I'd rewind, listen, repeat, sometimes 5 times, sometimes 15. If I couldn't say a word clearly, I didn't skip it. I tackled it head on. I'd go back, again and again, until my mouth stopped resisting and started remembering. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. After a few weeks, I noticed something strange. I wasn't just speaking the sentences, I was predicting them. My tongue moved faster, my rhythm improved, and my accent, it softened. It was the first time I felt like my voice could carry their words and make them mine. Here's the lesson. Fluency doesn't come from watching, it comes from doing. Over and over. Just like learning a song or training your body, speaking needs reps. And that Walkman, simple as it was, gave me the space to fail, to repeat, and to grow. But repetition alone isn't enough. To build real fluency, I had to turn that practice into a system, a weekly structure that helped me measure progress and build momentum. 3 months into my routine, repeating news clips, practicing on the subway, whispering, and then speaking out loud, I still wasn't sure if I was making real progress. Some days felt strong, others, like I was just spinning my wheels. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was on the phone with an old friend, just a casual chat, nothing special, but right in the middle of the call, he paused. "Wait a second," he said. "What?" I asked. "Your English, it's good, really good." And the way he said good, not out of politeness but with honest surprise, hit me like a wave. He meant it. It wasn't just the word, it was the tone, the pause, the energy. He heard the difference. And for the first time, I felt it too. That one moment changed something inside me. Because up until then, I was practicing in the dark, hoping it was working, but not really knowing. That compliment was the first light. It reminded me that consistency was paying off, even if the mirror hadn't shown it yet. Here's the lesson. Sometimes you won't see your progress until someone else reflects it back to you. But that doesn't mean the progress isn't happening. It just means you need to keep going until the results catch up with the effort. And after that call, I doubled down. I made a small change to my method, something that helped me build fluency faster and deeper. After that phone call, after hearing someone finally notice the change in my voice, I realized something important. I didn't need more material. I needed to go deeper with what I already had. So I made a small shift in my routine. Instead of recording a new tape every day, I chose one 60-minute tape each week and focused on mastering it. That's it. Just one. I listened to it on the subway, at home, during walks. I repeated the sentences until I could say them without hesitation. I practiced intonation, rhythm, stress, mimicking not just the words, but the energy behind them. At the start of the week, some parts still felt impossible. By Wednesday, I could say most of them. By Saturday, I wasn't just repeating, I was performing. That tape became part of me. And so did the next one. Week by week, I built a library of language, not just in my memory, but in my muscle. Here's the lesson. You don't get fluent by touching 100 things once. You get fluent by touching one thing 100 times. Repetition isn't boring when it's intentional. It becomes powerful, predictable, transformative. And once I had mastered 4 full tapes, 4 hours of real natural English, I did something that surprised even me. I went back to the beginning. And I spoke through every tape again, this time from memory. Want to know how that felt? I didn't plan to memorize anything. That was never the goal. I just wanted to speak clearly, confidently, without stopping to translate in my head. But something amazing happened after weeks of repeating those 4 tapes, every single day. One morning, as I walked to the subway, I pressed play like usual. Except this time, I didn't need to listen. The sentences started flowing, word by word, line by line, from memory. Not because I tried to memorize them, but because they had become part of me. They lived in my mouth now, not just in my mind. I spoke entire paragraphs with the same flow, the same rhythm, the same confidence as the voice I had been copying. I remember pausing mid-sentence and thinking, wait, did I just say that? It felt like performing, not reading. It was natural. It was automatic. It was mine. Here's the lesson. When you train with intention, repetition turns into rhythm, and rhythm turns into confidence. Fluency isn't about memorizing lines. It's about making English feel like music you've practiced so often. You don't have to think about the notes anymore. That moment gave me the courage to take things even further. To revisit what I'd learned, but in a smarter, more targeted way. After I had practiced 4 full tapes, 1 each week, I felt proud. But I also knew something. Not everything had stuck. Some parts were smooth, others still felt shaky. So instead of rushing forward to a 5th tape, I slowed down. I created something I now call the weekly review method. For 1 week, I went back to the beginning. Monday, I practiced tape 1, Tuesday, tape 2, Wednesday, tape 3, Thursday, tape 4. Friday and Saturday, I focused only on the hardest parts, the sections I had struggled with the most. And something incredible happened. That second time around, I didn't just recognize the sentences, I owned them. My mouth moved faster, my voice felt steadier, my accent softened even more. I wasn't just speaking English anymore, I was performing it with control. You see, learning something once isn't enough. Your brain needs space to forget and relearn. That's where deep learning happens. Here's the lesson. Review isn't going backward. It's how you move forward with confidence. The weekly review method turned shaky phrases into strong habits, and it helped me measure real growth, not just guess at it. And it was around this time, after 6 full weeks of practice, that something unexpected happened. People around me started noticing, and one day, a question from someone close to me completely caught me off guard. Sometimes, progress is quiet. You don't notice the day your voice becomes stronger or your sentences start to flow. But then, someone else notices, and that changes everything. I was talking to a friend on the phone, just casually catching up. We hadn't spoken in a while, and I was telling him about something funny that had happened at work. Halfway through my story, he stopped me. "Wait, what did you do to your English?" I laughed. "What do you mean?" He said, "Man, you sound different. You sound fluent. And not in a good job kind of way." It was real. He said it like someone who had just heard a different version of me for the first time. And that version was clear, confident, natural. That one question hit me harder than any compliment ever could. Because it wasn't about vocabulary or grammar, it was about energy. He didn't just hear the words, he felt the shift, and so did I. Here's the lesson. Fluency isn't a finish line you cross. It's a moment when your voice finally matches who you are. And that moment often sneaks up on you when you least expect it. After that call, something in me changed. I started speaking more boldly, more freely. Not because I was perfect, but because I finally believed in my own voice. And that confidence pushed me to explore deeper levels of speaking. Not just fluency, but fluency that sounded native. Even after I started speaking fluently, something still felt off. My words were clear. My grammar was good. People understood me. But my voice still didn't sound native. That's when I discovered something I now call the open throat breakthrough. It all started when my daughter joined her school chorus. One day, she came home and said, "Daddy, my teacher told us never to sing with a chicken throat." I laughed at first, but then I got curious. She explained, "You have to open your throat when you sing, or the sound gets stuck." And just like that, it clicked. I realized that I had been speaking English with a tight throat, a tense jaw, and a voice that held back. I was trying so hard to sound correct, I wasn't letting my breath flow. So I experimented. I started practicing with my throat open, breathing from my diaphragm, and letting the words flow up from my stomach instead of pushing them out from my lips. It felt strange at first, but powerful. Suddenly my voice became fuller. My pronunciation was clearer. And my tone? It sounded natural. I wasn't just saying the words, I was owning them with my whole body. Here's the lesson. Fluency isn't just in your mouth, it's in your breath, your posture, your energy. Open your throat. Let your voice rise without fear. Because when your body speaks with you, not against you, people don't just hear English. They hear you. And once I learned to speak with my full voice, something unexpected happened. A teacher heard me speak in front of a group of kids, and her reaction? I'll never forget it. A few years after I'd built my fluency, and after I'd been practicing the open throat technique for months, my daughter came home from school with a special request. "Daddy," she said, "can you come read to my class? You know? Like a guest reader?" I smiled, of course. But I'll be honest, I was nervous. Not because I didn't believe in my English, but because I knew how teachers sometimes look at immigrant parents. Like they're not sure what to expect. Like they're bracing themselves for broken grammar and awkward pauses. Sure enough, when I arrived, her teacher greeted me kindly. But I saw it in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation. She handed me the book, glanced at the kids, then back at me. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to read, I was going to perform. I opened my throat, took a deep breath, and brought the story to life. Voices, emotion, rhythm, every word with purpose. Halfway through the book, I looked up and saw the teacher's eyes widen. She smiled, genuinely surprised. Then she quietly took out her phone and began taking pictures. After I finished, she came up to me and said, "I didn't expect that. Your English, it's like a native speaker's." But more than that, what moved me most was watching my daughter beam with pride. Here's the lesson. The way you speak can change how others see you and how your children see themselves. Fluency isn't just for jobs or interviews. Sometimes it's for the moments that matter most. The ones your kids will never forget. And that day I realized something else. This journey wasn't just about English. It was about becoming the kind of person who could rise to any moment. When people think about fluency, they often imagine long vocabulary lists, advanced grammar, and fancy expressions. And don't get me wrong, those things matter. But what really holds most people back isn't knowledge, it's mindset. I've met learners who knew hundreds of English words but were too afraid to speak them. And I've met others who had a basic vocabulary, but they spoke with confidence, connection, and impact. What made the difference? Not intelligence, not talent, just this. One believed in their voice. The other didn't. I remember a student named Min. He once told me, "Jackson, I know the words, but when I speak, I sound like a child." I asked him one question. Would you speak differently if you believed you had something valuable to say? He paused, then smiled. That next week his voice changed, not because he learned new words, but because he stopped hiding behind the ones he already knew. Here's the lesson. Fluency begins when you stop asking, "Is this perfect?" and start asking, "Is this honest?" When you speak from a place of confidence, not performance, people feel it. They stop listening for mistakes and start listening to you. And building that mindset, it starts with small daily actions, tiny wins that grow into lasting confidence. People often ask me, what's the secret to becoming fluent? And honestly, it's not a secret at all. It's a ritual, something small, simple, and done every day. For me, it started with 10 minutes. 10 minutes every morning before work. I'd press play on my tape, repeat what I heard, and speak out loud, no matter how I felt that day. Some mornings I was tired, some mornings I felt stuck. But I showed up anyway. I didn't wait for motivation. I built a routine, and that routine built muscle in my mouth, in my breath, and in my confidence. Over time, 10 minutes turned into 15, then 20. But it wasn't about the time. It was about the consistency. Even on busy days, I'd sneak in 5 minutes during my commute or while brushing my teeth. It became part of my life, like coffee or brushing my hair. No drama, no pressure, just me and my voice. Here's the lesson. You don't need hours. You need a rhythm. Something repeatable. Something light. Because when you commit to a small ritual, it removes the decision. It removes the doubt. And what's left is progress. That ritual became the foundation of my fluency. But there's one more piece that helped me go even further. Something that had nothing to do with pronunciation or grammar and everything to do with vision. Before my English started to sound fluent, before I felt natural, before anyone complimented me, I did something that seemed small, but made a huge difference. I imagined the future version of me who already could speak English confidently. I saw him walking into a job interview. Calm, prepared, clear. I saw him traveling, ordering food, making jokes in English, and hearing people laugh. I saw him reading to his daughter's class, and not just reading, but inspiring. I didn't know how I would get there. But I let myself believe that version of me existed. And every time I felt stuck or awkward or discouraged, I reminded myself, you're just practicing for the person you're becoming. One of my students, Ahmed, once told me, Jackson, I don't feel fluent yet, but when I imagine the version of me who already is, I want to meet him, and I want to become him. That's the power of vision. It gives you something to aim for, not just something to escape from. And when you show up each day with that version of you in mind, something changes. You start speaking differently. You start holding your shoulders higher. You start owning the journey, not just surviving it. Here's the lesson. Fluency doesn't begin with perfect words. It begins with a clear picture of who you're becoming. After all the practice, the tapes, the subway rides, the early mornings, and quiet whispers turned into confident speech, I came to a realization that I hadn't expected. Fluency was never just about English. It was about finding my voice. Because for years I thought my accent made me sound small. I thought mistakes made me sound less intelligent. But what I learned, what I lived, was this. The world doesn't need perfect English. It needs honest voices. Voices with stories. With courage. With heart. The day I truly understood that, I stopped trying to hide behind native-like and started speaking like me. Fully, openly, unapologetically. And that's what I want for you too. You don't need to wait until your English is perfect to speak. Speak now. Speak clearly. Speak truthfully. Because your story matters. And someone out there is waiting to hear it. Not polished, not flawless, but real. Here's the final lesson. Fluency isn't the destination, it's the door. What matters is what you do with it once it opens. And now that you've made it this far, through every strategy, every story, every moment, I want to leave you with one final message from the heart. If you've made it to this point, really made it, you already have something powerful inside you. Not just the desire to speak English, but the courage to keep going, even when it's hard, even when it's slow. I want you to know something. You don't have to be fluent to be worthy. You don't have to speak perfectly to be heard. And you don't have to wait to feel ready before you start. Because the truth is, you already have what it takes. When I started this journey, I was just like you, frustrated, embarrassed, unsure, but I took one step, then another, then another. Some days felt like progress, some days didn't, but little by little it worked, not because I was special, but because I kept showing up. Here's my message to you. Don't wait until you feel confident. Start now and let the confidence catch up. Your voice matters, your story matters, and your English is just the beginning. So whatever your next step is, reading out loud, shadowing a sentence, recording your voice, take it today, not tomorrow, not when you have time. Today, because your journey doesn't start when you're fluent. It starts the moment you believe I can become fluent. And that moment is now. If this video meant something to you, even just one sentence, one idea, one story, I hope you'll carry it with you. Because fluency doesn't happen all at once. It happens in these quiet moments where something clicks and you think, I'm not alone in this. That's what this channel is for, not to impress you, not to overwhelm you, but to remind you that your journey matters, that your progress, slow, steady, imperfect, is real. If you're still here, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this story spoke to you most? Was it the repetition method, the open throat breakthrough, or maybe it was that one moment when someone finally noticed your growth? Whatever it is, share it in the comments. Your words might inspire someone else, someone who's just starting and needs that small spark of hope. And if you'd like to keep learning English through real stories, honest experiences, and tools that actually work, subscribe to Jackson English Stories. Because this isn't just about learning a language, it's about becoming who you were meant to be. One word, one voice, one day at a time. Thanks for spending this time with me. Take a deep breath, speak your truth, and I'll see you in the next story.